Lyra stood alone on the barren surface of her planet, her eyes scanning the desolate horizon. The once thriving world that had been her home now lay in ruins. A vast, empty expanse stretched before her, filled only with the echoes of a long-lost civilization. It was a place where life had once flourished, filled with towering cities, bustling markets, and endless skyways. Now, only silence and dust remained. The planet's cities were abandoned, their once grand structures now reduced to crumbling skeletons. Her species, the Syra, had been a powerful and technologically advanced race, ruling over countless star systems. But all of that was now gone. The war had wiped them out. The last remnants of their society were scattered across this dead world, with no one left to remember the grandeur they had once achieved. Lyra was the last one, the sole survivor of her people. She often found herself wandering through the empty streets, tracing the ghosts of a life that was no more. Each day felt like an eternity. The sun burned relentlessly in the sky, casting harsh shadows across the ruins. She spent her time searching for anything that might help her survive, but the supplies were running low, and there was little hope of finding more. The world she once knew had become an uninhabitable wasteland, a constant reminder of the fragility of existence. She had no purpose now, nothing to strive for. Her heart ached with loneliness, and every corner of this forsaken planet seemed to mock her solitude. Lyra had always been strong, the leader of her people, someone who was never afraid to face the impossible. But now, as the days blurred into one another, she felt small and insignificant, like a shadow of the woman she used to be. She had lost everything, her home, her family, and her people. It was a thought she couldn't escape, no matter how hard she tried. She had become nothing more than a memory, drifting through the ruins of a world that no longer existed. In the silence of her isolation, Lyra spent her nights staring at the stars. They were a constant reminder that she was not alone in the universe, but the vastness of space also made her feel even smaller. Her people had once dominated the stars, their ships and fleets a symbol of their power. Now all that was left were scattered pieces of their technology, remnants of a forgotten time. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was simply waiting for her own end, a fate she had come to accept. The universe had moved on without her, and she was just an echo of something that had once been great. But one day, something changed. It was faint at first, a blip on the radar that Lyra almost didn't notice. She was sitting in the ruins of an old observatory when the signal came through. It was weak, but it was there. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be another life form? A chance for contact? For a brief moment, Lyra allowed herself to feel something other than despair. Hope. Maybe she wasn't the last one after all. Maybe there was someone else out there. Someone who could help her. Someone who could break the cycle of loneliness she had been trapped in. She quickly moved to her ship, an old battered vessel that she had kept in working order through sheer determination. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get her to where she needed to be. Her hands shook as she worked the controls, guiding the ship toward the source of the signal. As she flew through the dark expanse of space, she tried to push away the doubts that crept into her mind. She had been alone for so long that the idea of meeting another living being felt almost impossible. What if it was a trap? What if it was just another cruel joke of the universe? But then, as she neared the coordinates, the signal grew stronger. Her ship's instruments lit up with information, and Lyra's heart raced. It was real. There was something out there. And then she saw it. A ship. A human ship drifting in the void of space, its systems failing. Lyra's eyes widened in disbelief. Humans. She had heard stories of them, of their fierce determination and their strength. They were a young species, not yet advanced enough to challenge the great empires of the galaxy, but they were known for their resilience. She had never encountered one before, but she had always wondered what they were like. Now fate had brought one to her doorstep. Lyra's ship made contact with the human vessel, and she carefully approached. Her senses heightened. She had to be cautious. The human might be dangerous, or it could be just another relic of a forgotten time. But as she docked, something strange happened. She felt a stirring in her chest, a mix of excitement and fear. Was this what she had been waiting for? The possibility of meeting someone who could change her life forever. The ship was a wreck, its outer hull torn and battered from some kind of impact. Lyra couldn't help but notice the signs of struggle, of a fight. As she moved through the corridors of the ship, the silence was eerie, and the weight of the moment seemed to hang in the air. She found a man, unconscious and covered in blood. His uniform was unfamiliar, his face gaunt from exhaustion. He was human, just as the signal had indicated. For a moment, Lyra didn't know what to do. She had never encountered a human before, and the unfamiliarity of the situation made her hesitate. But something in her knew she couldn't turn back now. She had come this far, and this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. Slowly, she knelt beside him and began to assess his injuries. He was alive, but barely. As she worked to stabilize him, her mind raced. What had happened to his ship? Who had done this to him? And why had he ended up on her planet? The questions filled her mind, but the most pressing one was simple. What would happen next? Lyra had spent so long in isolation, trapped in her own thoughts and memories, that the arrival of this human seemed like a dream. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what this encounter might bring, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life had just changed. The loneliness she had known for so long would soon be a thing of the past. As she worked to save him, she couldn't help but wonder, was this human her salvation, or was he just another reminder of how alone she truly was? Only time would tell, but for the first time in years, Lyra felt a glimmer of hope. The planet's surface stretched endlessly before her, an ocean of cracked earth and empty structures. Lyra, a lone figure in her dark spacesuit, moved with purpose, her eyes sharp and determined, despite the despair she felt. Her every step echoed in the stillness of the ruined city, and the wind howled through the shattered buildings. As she looked up at the darkening sky, the stars above seemed distant and cold, a constant reminder of the vast, empty universe she inhabited. But then, a flicker of light, a blip on the radar, changed everything. Her heart beat faster as she navigated her ship through the barren void, the controls familiar beneath her hands. The stars outside the cockpit window blurred into streaks of light as the ship accelerated toward the signal. The glow of her ship's instruments bathed her face in a soft light, and for the first time in years, a sense of anticipation filled the air. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change her life forever. As she approached the wreckage of the human ship, the remnants of battle were evident. The ship was battered and torn, pieces of it scattered across the void. The hull had been torn open, exposing the interior to the cold emptiness of space. Lyra's eyes narrowed as she prepared to dock, her breath steady despite the rush of emotions flooding her. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The metallic clang of Lyra's spaceship docking echoed through the empty hull as she cautiously approached the injured human. His ship, a twisted wreck of what had once been a powerful vessel, now lay silent in the vast emptiness of space. As the hatch opened, Lyra stepped out into the wreckage, her boots crunching on the cold floor. The faint hum of her own ship's systems was the only sound, the silence of the human vessel overwhelming. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew this was her first real contact with another living being in years. There, lying amidst the wreckage, was the human. His dark hair was matted with blood, and his suit was torn, stained with the marks of battle. The faint glow of the emergency lights illuminated his face, revealing a pair of piercing eyes that still burned with life, despite the exhaustion and pain that marked his features. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s, but the weariness in his eyes made him seem older than he was. His name, she learned, was Ryan. Lyra approached cautiously, her every step calculated. She had heard of humans, of course. Everyone had. But she had never actually met one. Their species was a mystery to her, distant and foreign, much like her own. She was unsure of how to act around him, unsure of what kind of emotions he would stir in her. She had been alone for so long, isolated from the rest of the universe, that she wasn't sure how to interact with someone from a completely different world. Ryan's breathing was shallow, labored as he stirred slightly, his eyes flickering open for a moment before closing again. His lips parted as if trying to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Lyra's heart quickened, and she knelt beside him, her fingers gently brushing his forehead. He was burning with fever, his body barely clinging to life, but the faint glimmer of recognition in his eyes told her that he was still aware of her presence, still fighting to hold on. "Hey, are you real?" His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of someone who had been through a battle, someone who had seen too much. Lyra's throat tightened. She had never encountered a human before, and here she was, helping one who was barely conscious, lying in the wreckage of his ship. She was unsure of how to respond, unsure of what to do, but she couldn't leave him. The thought of leaving him to die alone in the cold void of space was unbearable. "I'm here," Lyra finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "I'll help you." Ryan's eyes flickered open again, just for a moment. He studied her face, as if trying to make sense of the alien before him. His lips curled into a weak smile, though it was tinged with pain. "You're an alien?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra nodded slowly, her heart heavy. "Yes, I am the last of my kind." The words hung in the air between them, a heavy confession that seemed to carry the weight of an entire lost civilization. Ryan's eyes widened slightly, though he didn't respond at first. The silence between them stretched on for what felt like an eternity. It was a silence that spoke volumes, one filled with unspoken emotions and shared loneliness. Lyra gently lifted Ryan's arm, checking his pulse and looking over his wounds. The severity of his injuries was clear. He had taken a hit during his mission, and the gash on his side looked deep. She could feel his body shuddering beneath her touch, the weight of his pain pressing against her chest. "Don't worry," Lyra said softly, her voice calming. "I'll fix you." Ryan winced but managed a small chuckle. "You're a healer too. I didn't expect aliens to be good at this stuff." Lyra smiled faintly, a sense of pride rising in her chest. "I was trained in many things: survival, technology, and yes, medicine. My people were experts in all fields." She paused, looking away for a moment as the memories of her lost civilization came rushing back. "But I've been alone for so long. I never imagined I'd be helping someone like you." Ryan seemed to sense the shift in her mood, the way her tone had become softer, almost melancholic. He shifted slightly, wincing at the pain, but managing to raise his hand. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra looked down at him, unsure how to process his words. She had spent so many years in solitude, so many years surrounded by the ruins of her people's once great civilization. Could she really trust this human? Could she open up to him, despite the deep, unhealed wounds of her past? As she worked to stabilize him, she found herself growing more and more attached to him. There was something about Ryan, his strength, even in the face of pain, his unwavering will to survive, that resonated deeply within her. She couldn't help but feel a bond beginning to form between them, a connection that transcended species and language. Ryan was no stranger to hardship. He had been on countless missions, had fought battles that would have broken lesser men. But there was something different about this encounter. It wasn't just the pain in his body. It was the overwhelming sense of loneliness that mirrored her own. He had lost people too, and Lyra could see the weight of that loss in his eyes. "What happened to you?" Lyra asked softly as she cleaned his wounds, the tension in her voice betraying the curiosity she felt. Ryan's eyes closed again, but his voice remained steady. "We were on a mission to explore new worlds. My team and I. We crashed. We're the last of our group. The others didn't make it." His voice trailed off, the sorrow in his words obvious. Lyra paused for a moment, her hand stilling as she processed his words. It was a story she understood too well. Loss, survival, loneliness. She had felt it every day since the fall of her own civilization. She could relate to the pain in his voice, the emptiness that came with losing everything. As she continued to tend to his injuries, she realized that for the first time in years, she was no longer alone. Ryan's presence, though quiet and broken, filled a space inside her she had forgotten even existed. It was the same space that had been hollowed out by the loss of her people, the space that had once been filled with hope, love, and life. "You're not alone either," Ryan murmured, his voice thick with exhaustion. "You have me now." Lyra's heart fluttered at his words. There was something in them that made her feel less isolated, less like a survivor of a forgotten world. For the first time, she felt the weight of the universe lift ever so slightly. In that moment, Lyra realized that perhaps, just perhaps, there was still hope. And with hope came the possibility of something more, something she had almost given up on: connection. Ryan's hand twitched as he reached out, weakly grasping her wrist. "Thank you," he whispered, "for saving me." The words were simple, but they meant everything. Lyra could feel the shift in their relationship, the beginning of something new, something that neither of them had expected. As she looked at him, the loneliness she had carried for so long began to fade, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years, the possibility of a future. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe in it. As the days passed, a subtle change began to occur between Ryan and Lyra. What had started as a simple exchange of help, born out of necessity, slowly transformed into something deeper. Their connection, initially based on survival, began to bloom into something far more personal, something neither of them could ignore. The planet they were stranded on was a harsh one. Its landscapes were wild and unforgiving, home to dangerous creatures that seemed to lurk around every corner. But as they spent more time together, they became a team, a duo that fought side by side against the planet's predators, learning how to survive each day. Lyra's alien abilities, her advanced knowledge of technology, and Ryan's human ingenuity worked together seamlessly. They repaired the spaceship, building their temporary shelter, and worked tirelessly to find a way to survive. There was something magnetic between them, an unspoken understanding that grew stronger each day. Every glance, every shared moment seemed to tie them closer. They found themselves communicating without words at times, reading each other's expressions and body language. Ryan would flash a quick grin after defeating one of the planet's terrifying beasts, and Lyra would return it with a small but sincere smile, as if silently acknowledging the connection they were forming. Their relationship was built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared hardships, and an undeniable attraction that neither of them could explain. One night, as the two of them sat on the roof of their makeshift shelter, the stars spread out above them like a glittering sea. The vastness of space seemed to swallow them whole, but for the first time, the silence felt comforting. They were two individuals from completely different worlds, yet here they were, sitting side by side, with nothing but the sound of the night air and the crackling of a small fire between them. Ryan was the first to speak, his voice breaking the calm stillness. "You know, I've been thinking about your world," he said, his eyes fixed on the stars above. "I've heard stories, but they're just stories. I want to know the truth, about where you come from, about you." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had felt it, the quiet curiosity in his gaze, the way he always asked questions, trying to learn more about her culture, her history. It was something she hadn't experienced before, and it made her both nervous and curious. She had never shared the deep pain of her past with anyone, especially not a human. She had always kept that part of her life locked away, a painful reminder of a civilization lost. But now, with Ryan beside her, something changed. She wasn't sure if it was the way he looked at her or the way his voice softened when he spoke of her world, but she felt a strange sense of safety. She hesitated for a moment, her thoughts racing. Should she tell him? Could she trust him with the weight of her history? Lyra took a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her tunic. "My people," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "We were once a great civilization. We had everything: technology, knowledge, power. But we lost it all. A war destroyed us, and I'm the last one left." Ryan turned his head toward her, his expression softening as he listened intently. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I can't imagine what that must feel like." Lyra looked down, trying to hide the emotions that threatened to rise to the surface. "I don't know if I can explain it," she continued. It's like carrying a weight that never goes away. A feeling of being completely alone in a universe full of people." Ryan didn't speak immediately. Instead, he reached over and placed a hand on her shoulder. A simple gesture, but one that sent a jolt through Lyra's chest. She had never felt a touch like that before, not from anyone. His warmth, his presence, gave her a sense of comfort she hadn't realized she had been missing. She could feel the sincerity in his touch, in the way he didn't just sympathize with her pain, but seemed to share it with her. Lyra swallowed hard, the words almost slipping from her lips before she could stop them. "And you, Ryan, what's your story?" Ryan exhaled slowly, a long heavy sigh that spoke volumes. He shifted slightly, his posture more relaxed now, but his eyes were distant, lost in thought. "I don't know if it's any different from yours," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "I've lost people too. Friends, family, my entire team. The missions I've been on, they haven't been kind." Lyra's gaze softened. She had known that Ryan had lost people, but hearing it from him made her understand the depth of his own pain. In that moment, they were no longer two strangers from different worlds. They were two survivors, two broken souls who had experienced loss in ways that had shaped who they were. They didn't need words to understand each other. The conversation drifted to quieter topics as the night stretched on. They talked about the stars, about their dreams, and about the things they hoped for in the future. But underneath it all, there was a shift, something palpable. The tension that had been building between them, the silent understanding, was no longer ignored. It was there, lingering in the spaces between their words, in the subtle glances they exchanged. As they sat together, Lyra felt something unfamiliar stirring inside her. It wasn't just the thrill of survival or the need for companionship. It was something deeper, something far more complicated. She realized she was starting to care for him, in a way that she hadn't cared for anyone in years. The feelings she had for Ryan were new to her, uncharted territory, in a life that had been anything but normal. It confused her, made her feel vulnerable. She had been alone for so long that the idea of trusting someone else with her heart seemed almost impossible. But with Ryan, it felt different. Ryan, for his part, had always felt a magnetic pull toward Lyra, but he hadn't fully realized the depth of his feelings until that moment. It wasn't just her physical beauty, although that was undeniable. It was the way she carried herself, the quiet strength she possessed, and the vulnerability she revealed when she opened up to him. He admired her, not just as an alien, but as a person. Her resilience, her courage in the face of overwhelming loss, was something he found impossible to ignore. The night passed with an unspoken understanding hanging in the air. As they worked on the repairs together, their interactions became more natural, more comfortable. Lyra found herself stealing glances at Ryan, noticing the way his hands moved with precision, the way he handled the tools with a quiet confidence. She caught herself smiling when their fingers brushed by accident, a small spark of warmth igniting in her chest. Ryan, too, found himself thinking about her more and more. The way she would catch his eye when they worked together, the way she seemed to understand him without him needing to say a word. There was a connection growing between them, slow, steady, and undeniable, and neither of them knew how to navigate it. As they worked late into the night, the tension between them became harder to ignore. It wasn't just the physical closeness or the soft, lingering touches. It was the emotional bond that was blossoming. They were both hesitant, unsure of what the future held or what would happen if they crossed the line that seemed to be drawing them together. But with every passing day, that line seemed to get thinner. In the silence of the night, under the blanket of stars, both Ryan and Lyra realized that something more than just survival was beginning to take shape between them. It wasn't just the need for companionship, it was a deeper, more powerful force that neither of them could deny. And though neither of them knew what the future held, one thing was certain: their bond was growing stronger, and so were the feelings they had for each other. The peaceful nights that Ryan and Lyra had spent repairing the spaceship and getting to know each other were about to come to a violent and abrupt end. As the stars glistened above them, the sound of distant engines echoed through the atmosphere. For the first time since their arrival, the calm of the planet was disturbed by something far more dangerous than the wild creatures they had been battling. It was an enemy, a faction from Lyra's past, coming to claim what they had lost. Their ship's sensors picked up a massive force approaching at incredible speed. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as the identification flashed across the console. Enemy ship detected, Imperium of Salgar. The name alone sent a cold shiver down her spine. The Imperium of Salgar was a powerful and ruthless alien faction, one that had once been her people's greatest threat. They had destroyed Lyra's homeworld, leaving her to fend for herself as the sole survivor of her kind. Now, they had come to finish what they had started. Ryan turned to Lyra, his face taut with concern. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice laced with worry. "Who are they?" Lyra clenched her fists, her jaw set in determination. "They're the ones who destroyed my people," she said, her voice tight with anger. "And they're here for me. They want to capture me and—" She paused, not wanting to say the rest, but Ryan could already see the fear in her eyes. "They want to kill you," Ryan finished, his voice low. The tension in the air was palpable as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The Imperium's ships were equipped with advanced technology far beyond anything Ryan or Lyra had seen. Their cloaking devices could make them invisible to most sensors, and their eye-powered robots were unmatched in battle. The odds were not in their favor. Without wasting another second, Lyra sprang into action. She knew they had to act fast if they were to survive. "We need to get to the ship," she said, her voice commanding. "We have to fight. We can't let them take me." Ryan nodded, his face hardening. He didn't need to ask questions. He had already made up his mind. Together, they ran towards the ship, adrenaline pumping through their veins. The planet's harsh terrain didn't slow them down. Every step they took brought them closer to their ship, but also closer to danger. Just as they reached the ship, an explosion rang out from above, sending shockwaves through the ground beneath them. The sky above turned dark as massive alien ships appeared, their cloaking devices flickering on and off. The battle had begun. The Imperium was here, and they weren't going to let anyone stand in their way. The first wave of attack came swiftly. Alien drones, mechanical soldiers equipped with laser guns and shields, descended from the sky, their metal bodies reflecting the dim light of the planet's twin moons. They landed with a force that shook the ground, their weapons ready to unleash devastation. Ryan and Lyra wasted no time. They ran to the ship's weapon systems, activating the defense systems as fast as they could. Lyra's fingers flew over the controls, her mind racing. She accessed the ship's cloaking technology, hoping to make them invisible to the incoming fire. Meanwhile, Ryan prepared the ship's weapons, ready to engage the enemy in battle. "Ready," he shouted, his voice steady despite the chaos. With a deep breath, Lyra activated the ship's cloaking field. For a moment, they were hidden, silent, invisible, and ready to strike. The enemy drones hovered over them, scanning for any signs of life. Ryan and Lyra knew that the slightest move could reveal their position, but they couldn't stay hidden forever. Then the battle began in full force. Ryan opened fire first, his weapon aimed at the drones above. The ship's turrets lit up, sending bursts of energy into the air. Explosions rocked the sky as the drones fell from the air, their shields cracking under the sheer force of the blasts. But the Imperium was not going to make it easy. They retaliated with devastating force, their advanced weaponry firing upon the cloaked ship, sending shockwaves through the atmosphere. Lyra's eyes darted to the control panel as she struggled to maintain the ship's cloaking field. It was draining energy fast, and she knew they couldn't keep it up for long. "We need to move," she shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "They're about to break through." But before Ryan could respond, a massive explosion rocked the ground beneath them. One of the enemy ships had dropped its cloaking and unleashed a powerful orbital bombardment. The entire planet seemed to shake as the blasts rained down, tearing up the landscape in their wake. The ship's cloaking field flickered and failed, leaving them exposed. With the ship's cloaking compromised, the enemy drones swooped in for the kill. Their laser guns fired rapidly, and the ground around Ryan and Lyra exploded in bursts of fire and debris. They scrambled for cover, ducking behind the damaged ship as the drones advanced. Ryan fired back with everything he had, his shots narrowly missing the incoming drones. "We can't hold out much longer," Ryan yelled, frustration and fear creeping into his voice. "We need to get out of here." Lyra gritted her teeth. "I won't leave this planet without getting revenge on them," she said fiercely, her voice laced with bitterness. The memories of her fallen people, her destroyed world, surged to the surface. The anger she had buried for so long was bubbling to the top. She knew she had to stop the Imperium, once and for all. But Ryan was injured. He had taken a hit from the drone's laser blasts, and his side was bleeding heavily. Lyra could see the pain in his eyes as he staggered to his feet, but he refused to let it slow him down. He needed to keep fighting. For her, for them, and for the hope of survival. In the midst of the chaos, Lyra had to make a choice. Should she go after the Imperium and seek revenge for the loss of her people, or should she focus on saving Ryan? It was a decision that tore at her heart. She could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her, the desire to avenge her fallen civilization, clashing with the need to protect the one person who had stood by her side. As the drones closed in, Lyra made her choice. With a surge of determination, she activated the ship's self-destruct mechanism. "We're leaving, Ryan," she shouted, her voice resolute. "This ends now." They both ran towards the ship, ignoring the laser blasts that came dangerously close. Lyra and Ryan boarded the ship together, the final countdown echoing in their ears. The ship's engines roared to life as they blasted off from the planet's surface, escaping the final waves of the Imperium's attack. But as the ship soared into the sky, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was just the beginning. The Imperium was far from defeated, and their wrath was far from over. But for the moment, they had survived, together. And as the stars stretched out before them, Lyra realized that this was not just a fight for her people's survival. It was a fight for something far more precious, the bond she had forged with Ryan, and the future they might have together. But no matter what came next, one thing was certain. The Imperium had no idea what they were about to face. The final battle had been fierce, but nothing could have prepared Ryan and Lyra for the intensity of what lay ahead. The enemy forces, relentless in their pursuit, had pushed them to their absolute limits. They had fought through waves of alien drones, dodged powerful energy blasts, and survived the chaos of space combat. But now, as the dust settled and the sound of battle faded into a tense silence, they were face to face with their greatest challenge yet. Ryan had been injured in the thick of the fight, a deep wound across his abdomen that was quickly draining his strength. He stumbled, his breath coming in short gasps, and collapsed against the ship's console. His vision blurred, and his thoughts began to scatter as the blood flowed freely from his wound. He could hear Lyra's frantic voice calling his name, but it sounded distant. Every breath felt like it took more effort than the last. Lyra was by his side in an instant, her hands shaking as she tried to assess his condition. The ship was in ruins, and the battle had left them with very few options. "Ryan, stay with me," she pleaded, her voice trembling with fear. She had never seen him like this, so vulnerable, so fragile. The man who had been her strength was now the one who needed saving. Ryan's eyes met hers, filled with a mix of pain and determination. He reached out, his hand weakly grasping hers. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You've done enough. I don't want you to lose everything for me." The words hit Lyra harder than she expected. She could feel her heart breaking, knowing that Ryan, despite everything they had been through together, was ready to sacrifice himself. She couldn't let him go, not after everything they had shared. But she also knew that the danger they faced wasn't over. The Imperium was still out there, and their revenge would be swift and brutal. Her heart ached and her mind raced. She knew what she had to do, but making that choice, risking everything, was a decision she never thought she would have to make. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, letting the weight of her past wash over her. Memories of her fallen people, her destroyed homeworld, and the years of loneliness she had endured flooded her mind. The pain, the fear, the anger, everything that had driven her to this point, seemed to resurface in that instant. But she couldn't afford to let those feelings control her now. Not when Ryan's life was on the line. With a deep breath, Lyra stood tall, her resolve hardening. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for Ryan. She was fighting for their future. Lyra looked at Ryan, her eyes filled with an unwavering determination. "You won't die, Ryan," she said, her voice strong despite the tears that threatened to fall. "I won't let you." She stood up, leaving his side momentarily to head toward the ship's control room. Her mind was clear now, her thoughts focused entirely on one goal: saving Ryan. She activated the ship's emergency medical systems, hoping they could stabilize him long enough for her to find a solution. But deep down, she knew that the ship's resources were limited, and there was no guarantee they would make it in time. The battle had taken its toll, and the ship was barely functional. The systems were damaged, the engines were running on minimal power, and they were stranded in the middle of an alien territory with no way to call for help. The Imperium's forces were closing in fast, and time was running out. Lyra's eyes narrowed as she analyzed the situation. She knew there was one last thing she could try, something that would require the ultimate sacrifice, something that could give them a chance to escape, but it would come at a price. The decision was terrifying, but it was the only option she had left. The only way to save Ryan, and possibly themselves, was for Lyra to tap into the deep reserves of power that lay dormant within her, the power she had long suppressed. For a moment, she hesitated. The power she was about to unleash could either save them or destroy everything she had fought for. But she had no choice. She had to do this. For Ryan, for their love, and for the future they both dreamed of. With a heavy heart, Lyra turned to face the control panel. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and activated the ancient power source hidden within her. The ship's systems hummed to life, and the energy coursed through her like wildfire. It was a force she had never fully embraced, but now she needed it more than ever. The lights in the ship flickered as the power surged. Lyra's body trembled as the energy enveloped her, but she held firm, her hands gripping the controls as she directed the power to heal Ryan. The light from her body blazed, filling the room with an intense glow, and the air seemed to vibrate with an almost tangible force. Ryan's breathing became steadier as the wound on his abdomen began to heal. The blood flow slowed, and the pain in his body eased. He watched in awe as Lyra's power radiated from her, a dazzling display of strength and sacrifice. It was a side of her he had never seen before, but he knew, in that moment, that she was doing everything she could to save him. "Lyra, what are you doing?" Ryan gasped, his voice hoarse. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She couldn't afford to break her focus. The energy was draining her, but she refused to stop. She couldn't let Ryan die, not after everything they had been through. Not after all the moments they had shared. Slowly, the light around them began to dim, and the room returned to its normal state. The energy Lyra had unleashed began to dissipate, but Ryan was no longer on the edge of death. His wound had healed, his strength returned, and his breath became steady. He sat up, staring at Lyra in disbelief. "Lyra, you saved me," he whispered, his voice filled with awe and gratitude. Lyra's legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed into Ryan's arms. She had done it. She had saved him. But at what cost? The energy she had used was draining, and she could feel the weight of the sacrifice pressing on her. She had given everything for him. I couldn't lose you," she whispered, her voice weak. "I couldn't live with myself if I let you go." Ryan held her tightly, his arms around her as he looked into her eyes. "You're my everything, Lyra," he said softly, "and I will never let you go." Lyra closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his embrace wash over her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt truly at peace. She had given everything to save him, and in doing so, she had discovered a strength within herself that she never knew existed. But the battle was not over. The Imperium was still out there, and their thirst for revenge was unrelenting. Lyra knew they would have to fight again. But for now, in this moment, they had won. And as long as they had each other, they could face anything. Together, they would overcome whatever came next. The battle was over. The warship that had once threatened them, the alien forces that had pursued them relentlessly, and the darkness of the unknown, they were all behind them. Lyra and Ryan stood together on the bridge of their spaceship, breathing in the quiet after the chaos. The damage to the ship was extensive, but they had survived. Their ship was barely functional, yet in some way, it felt like they had come out stronger. They had faced death, loss, and impossible odds, and they had won. Together, the stars outside the ship's viewports glimmered like tiny diamonds in the vastness of space. The universe, infinite and full of unknowns, stretched out before them. Yet in that moment, it felt like they were the only two people in existence. Everything that had come before, Lyra's lonely existence, Ryan's struggles to understand a world so different from his own, seemed distant, almost like a dream. The bond they had formed in the most unlikely of circumstances now seemed unbreakable. Ryan worked methodically at the control panel, his fingers moving quickly as he repaired the spaceship's damaged systems. Lyra stood by, her gaze fixed on the stars outside. It was hard for her to focus on the task at hand when her mind was flooded with memories, both painful and joyful. They had been through so much together. She had seen the worst of humanity and the best. She had seen herself too, her fears, her doubts, and her growing love for Ryan. They had been through hell, and now they were on the verge of a new beginning. Lyra glanced over at Ryan, who was deep in concentration. His face was streaked with grime from the battle, but there was a peaceful look in his eyes, a calm that she had never seen before. He had always been a man of action, always ready to fight, to protect, to defend. But now, after everything, there was a gentleness about him. A part of him had softened, just as she had. She had seen the change in him, just as he had seen it in her. The journey had changed them both, made them stronger, more resilient, and more connected than ever before. As Ryan continued his work, Lyra moved to his side. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle but firm. He looked up at her, his face lighting up with a smile that made her heart flutter. It was a smile that said everything: gratitude, love, and the promise of a future together. It was a smile that spoke of everything they had overcome and everything they still had to look forward to. "You know, I never thought I'd end up here," Ryan said, his voice quiet but filled with meaning. "In a spaceship in the middle of nowhere, with an alien who's way stronger than me." Lyra chuckled softly, a warmth spreading through her chest. "And yet here we are," she replied, her voice playful. "Who would have thought?" "I used to think I had everything figured out," Ryan continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "But now I realize that life doesn't always go the way you expect, and I'm okay with that." Lyra felt a lump form in her throat. She had always been strong, always been independent, but for the first time in her life, she realized how much she needed Ryan. He had shown her the strength of humanity, their ability to love, to fight, to endure, and in doing so, he had healed a part of her that she thought was broken forever. "I never thought I could feel this way," Lyra said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought I could find someone like you. I've spent so much time alone, and now I don't ever want to be alone again." Ryan reached out, taking her hand in his, holding it as if it was the most precious thing in the world. His touch was warm, reassuring, and full of promise. "You don't have to be alone, Lyra. Not anymore. I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Time stood still as they shared that look, the unspoken bond between them stronger than any words could ever express. The universe was vast and unpredictable, but in each other they had found something constant, something worth fighting for. As Ryan finished the last of the repairs, the ship's engines hummed to life. The faint vibrations beneath their feet told them that they were ready to go. The journey ahead would be long, and the unknowns still loomed large, but Lyra and Ryan were no longer afraid. Together, they could face anything. Lyra took a deep breath, the weight of everything they had been through settling over her like a comforting blanket. She looked out the viewports again, watching as the stars drifted by. The stars seemed to glow brighter now, as if they were lighting the path ahead. It felt as though the universe was welcoming them, as if it was giving them a chance to start anew. For so long, Lyra had felt like an outsider, a survivor of a world that no longer existed. She had wandered through the galaxy, searching for meaning, searching for something to fill the emptiness in her heart. But now, for the first time, she felt like she had found it. Her purpose was no longer just about survival. It was about living, about sharing her life with someone who understood her in a way no one else ever had. Ryan was her home. He had become the anchor in the storm of her life, the one constant she could rely on. And together, they would build something new, a life filled with love, adventure, and the promise of a future that was theirs to create. Lyra turned to Ryan, her heart swelling with emotions she had never allowed herself to feel before. She smiled at him, her eyes shining with tears she didn't bother to hide. "Ready for the next adventure?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Ryan grinned, his hand still holding hers tightly. "Always," he replied. "With you, I'm ready for anything." And with that, the two of them stood side by side, facing the unknown together. The ship moved forward into the depths of space, the stars stretching out before them, a never-ending sea of possibilities. Whatever came next, Lyra knew one thing for certain: she was no longer alone. She had found her place in the universe, and it was with Ryan. They were a team now, bound not just by their shared experiences, but by their love, a love that had conquered all, and a love that would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. As the stars shimmered outside the ship, Lyra knew that their journey was only just beginning, and with Ryan by her side, she was ready to face it all.